and districts with Michael McSheehan. So thank you for all joining us. And if you signed up for the webinar series or just this series, we thank you for support and learning more about what we do here at TASH. A little housekeeping. My name is Devon Parks. I'm the Membership and Meetings Director at TASH, along with our colleague, Donald Taylor. He is our Membership and Communications Manager. He is here to help if you need any assistance or you have any technical difficulties. He will be checking the chat or the Q&A for any issues. This webinar will be recorded. As noted at the bottom of your screen is closed captioning. Anyone registered for this webinar will get a copy of the recording about a week, within the week. It takes us time to edit and everything. So, and if you have any questions or comments, you can always put them in the chat or the Q&A at any time. We will be monitoring that as well. So without further ado, our guest speaker is Michael McSheehan. Life's work has been the intersection of disability and K-12 education. He is a systems thinker and an implementation specialist, and a leader in the field of multi-tiered system of support and inclusive education. Whether it's assisting with student-specific supports, collaborating with students and districts, or working with the national organization, Michael brings passion, humor, and insight to the work of promoting equity and inclusion. Among his many activities during his nearly 20 years with the University of New Hampshire, Michael co-led the Center on Inclusive Education, Swift Education Center, and numerous state and national projects to advance education. Michael founded a consulting company, Evolve and Effect, to assist those who are seeking significant change in education. So without further ado, please welcome Michael McSheehan.
Thank you so much, Devon. And thank you to Tash for organizing such an amazing webinar series this spring. It's really been just riveting, great stuff. Thank you so much for all you do for Tash and that Tash does for the world. So I'm so honored and excited to be with you guys today. I see people are introducing themselves in the chat. Please let us know where you're from. We want to get those pins in the map to see who's here and hanging out with us. I see some names I recognize, and I'm hopeful that you all will engage during some of the chat discussions that we're going to have. We are on the Zoom webinar platform, so I won't be able to have voice back and forth with you, but we'll be trying to have a conversation with you via the chat. You should have gotten, hey Krista, surprise, you're here. You should have gotten an email with information about this webinar, including 3 resource materials that will support you through the webinar. I'm going to share my screen and just point those out so that you know what those 3 items are, so that you'll be able to follow along and manage logistics on your side before I get into the content of the webinar. So let me go ahead and share my screen. You all can see the what sunrise looks like from my house in the winter, I guess, is the one that I'm sharing there. If I drag this over, you should all now see Adobe. And the first file that I'm showing here is a PDF of the slides. So you have every single slide I'm going to share. So you have that content. If you're somebody who's a big note taker, you can do that in addition to these. Anything you see in a slide, you have. There's also a one-page handout, PDF, that talks about disability affirming descriptors and then negative practice examples, kind of non-disability affirming examples. And we're going to have a little conversation about the differences there in the first section of today's webinar. The last several sections of the webinar unpack this tool. which are a set of indicators for classrooms, schools, and school districts to move toward this idea of disability-affirming education. Mary Hsu, my good colleague, who is not able to join us today. She's in transit to the state of Oregon right now. But Mary actually is one who drove this tool and did the majority of the authoring. I've been able to add to it and expand on some ideas, and I'm really looking forward to grappling and sharing and hearing your input on the tool today. So those are the three resources that you have access to. I'm going to go ahead and start up my slides and start the conversation going with this webinar. The session really, in this session, I'm hoping with you all to have this conversation about, is there a distinct difference between the idea of disability-affirming education and what has been happening in our field around inclusive education? Are those the same? Are those different? I'm going to show you how we think that they are different substantively, and how one can help us with the other. With this, we are going to be talking about ableism, so there may be some information and content that's a trigger for some of us, and just want to make sure to put that warning out there for you right up front, because it's in the first segment of slides that we'll be talking about that. The goals here by the end of this 90-minute session, you should have a general introduction and general understanding, an initial understanding of the Disability Affirming Indicators tool, and be able to practice a little bit with thinking about disability affirming spaces and educational experiences and their impact on all learners, not just those with disabilities. So we'll be talking about alternatives to what have traditionally been, from my lens, more ableist practices that can occur in our schools, including language and the choices we make in terms of supports for students. I'm hopeful by the end you'll be able to identify a few next steps for yourselves based on where you're at and what you might be interested in doing with this information. So, brief historical frame. I'll be very brief with this. We know that our understanding of disability has evolved over the decades, right? We've gone from a time when we used to house people with disabilities separately from the mainstream of society. We wanted to protect society from them. We moved toward a model, then a more medical model, where we're interested in fixing deficits, remediation for people with disabilities, and have now moved into this phase of a social model where we're interested in what are the supports that help individuals fit into the environments and communities that we have in our neighborhoods and around the world. With each of these shifts, we see our evolving understanding informing a broad frame of how we're approaching our interactions with, our embracing of, and our design for disabled individuals. So I want to dive a little bit more into the social model, which is where a lot of people in our field feel like we've landed and that's good. Some people refer to this as the person-environment fit theory, right? It's this idea that people with disabilities are excluded or segregated or have limited participation in society because of interactions that occur between the person and the environment, right? That the breakdown is not the individual and their disabilities, it's that the built environment didn't have them in mind when it was designed and created. So this built environment, the kind of way that social activity is organized, can often restrict the participation of disabled people. In the social model, in this person-environment fit theory, oftentimes I hear colleagues, educators in the field, other advocates, focusing on creating access to the environment, social activity. We talk about access to the general curriculum. And what that often includes is this parenthetical word that I've put on the phrase here in bright red, the existing environment, the existing social activity, the existing curriculum, as opposed to thinking about a redesign or a complete rethink of how something is built. So for me, the social model has a limitation on it in the way that I'm seeing it currently applied. This was a conversation that Mary Shue and I had repeatedly as we were doing our work over the past decades. But if we listen carefully to what people with disabilities and their advocates are telling us, we need to consider a different frame here. So Jacob Meekins, middle school student who says to us, segregating autistic students, that's the most dumbest and pathetic excuse that I can ever think of because they want to get along with other classmates. Now, Jacob is educated in his neighborhood middle school, and he says, you know, it's just like segregation and apartheid. If this school was ever like an autistic school, segregated from a normal school, I would probably feel very sad. I've given you the link to the full film from which this quote comes. Hearing Jacob's words are powerful. Understanding his perspective is important and centers and grounds us here in our work in TASH, right? We're anchored on the voice of individuals with disabilities. Tom Hare, an amazing leader, gifted us with his insights over the decades. And in 2002, I remember picking up and reading the Harvard Educational Review and this particular article on eliminating ableism in education and kind of like looking up and around like, is anybody seeing me read this right now? Because this stuff is radical. 23 years ago, Tom Hare was one of the first individuals openly having this conversation that I was exposed to. So I'll speak from my experience. He was the first person I heard naming openly this idea of ableism, particularly in education. As he points out in the article, for too many disabled children, their educational programs concentrate inordinately on the characteristics of their disability at the expense of access to the curriculum. Right, we know this. We see IEPs that have lots of goals that really look like they're trying to fix the kid as opposed to finding the fit in the social model with the environment. So we continue to listen to people with disabilities, and Keith Jones reinforces this idea that came from Jacob Meekins, right? I asserted myself, he says. I don't care about paste and popsicle sticks. I want math. Can I get some math? Right? And Keith is speaking here to that persistent and pervasive issue of low expectations, right? As if we can look at somebody, see that they have a disability, and set a bar of expectations for what they should be learning in schools. Those have been busted over and over again. Maybe we need to set a new standard. Norman Kuntz, longtime leader in our field, longtime advocate and voice of clarity to truly center on people with disabilities and their lived experiences, says, I quickly realized that it was a lack of opportunity and not the lack of ability that posed the greatest threat to my quality of life, right? So we have Keith Jones getting an opportunity to learn, but what is that opportunity designed for? Right? He's experiencing a lack of opportunity for true math instruction. And Norm talks about this across every aspect of his life. Education, relationships, community engagement, he hits all of them. And this thread comes back to this word ableism that we have got to begin to grapple more and more with in the field of education. Right? Ableism is present, from my perspective, when things are built or engaged on non-disabled frames and assumptions. Right? So if it was built by the people without disabilities, my entry point is to start looking for how I, as a disabled individual, was or was not considered in that design. The Center for Disability Rights gives a wonderful technical definition here of ableism that I just really like: a set of beliefs or practices that devalue and discriminate against people with physical, intellectual, or psychiatric disabilities, and often rests on the assumption that disabled people need to be fixed in one form or the other. So I bring this idea of being fixed back to the social model with the question, are we trying still with the social model of disability to fix people with disabilities, to fit into current environments in the way that they are built? And how's that working for us? Where's that getting us, right? We know we've got 15 plus years of a flat line of changing the educational environments for kids with autism, multiple disabilities, intellectual disabilities, right? Those three educational categories under IDEA represent populations who have the least access to this day in general education, to their peers, to general curriculum, to extracurricular activities, because of assumptions about them and their need to be fixed, either to fit into the current design or for their own individual, quote, well-being. So I'm hitting the big picture that ableism shows up in schools. Why don't you just pause for a second for yourselves and reflect? And don't type and hit enter just yet, but I'm going to ask you to participate in a waterfall share based on this question, right? What are your thoughts? How is ableism showing up in schools? What are you seeing? I shared a little bit about what I'm seeing. What are you seeing about how ableism is showing up in schools? Type a thought into chat, and I'm going to then count down, or count up to 3. And when I hit 3, you can press enter to share. And we'll do a full waterfall of responses pouring into chat. But just hold on. Reflect, give yourself time to compose. And in just a minute, I'll give you the countdown to share. I've queued up my chat window so I'll be able to see all everybody sharing. How is ableism showing up in schools? What are you seeing? Okay, here we go on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Press enter and share in chat. Oh my gosh, it really is pouring in. Look at you all. Ooh, some big long answers too. So we're hearing words that are used, assumptions that are made, teachers expecting students to conform with neurotypical behavioral expectations. Thank you for pointing that one out, Ruth. You're going to hear in this presentation a strong alignment with what's happening around neurodiversity and the neurodiversity paradigm. I'm blowing that out to say not just around neurodiversity, but all biodiversity as we're thinking about ability. Amy, talking in front of non-speaking students about them. Yes. Chelsea, not providing services. Krista, my son was initially excluded from French class. Yes. And he ended up thriving in French class, if I remember correctly, Krista. Mary Fisher, welcome to the webinar. Segregated classrooms. Yes. Low expectations, microaggressions, the entire school day focused on large-scale assessments. I'm shocked, Debbie Taub, that you mentioned large-scale assessments. I love it. Bring it in. Devaluation and erasure of cultures of disability. Yes. Wow, these are great. There are so many ways that they are. Absolutely. Being denied access to an advanced math class. Yes. Yes. IEP team members projecting their own limitations on students. We see this, and it can be challenging to both identify and then to call out, but that's a great one, right? We see IEP team members who may be writing goals that really reflect their own limitations, their own lack of understanding, not necessarily their fault that they have that limited understanding, but that ignorance is resulting in a narrowing of what's happening for students that has nothing to do with the student, but about the adults in the space. Great, wonderful. Seeing lots of great responses. This is wonderful. Oh yes, some of you may not be sharing to everyone and just to panelists. I'm seeing them all and they're great. Okay, let's move along. So the social model, for me, I feel like the social model only gets me and others that I'm working with so far. So I've been looking for alternatives. And one of the things that I've kind of stumbled across here is the work of Dora Raymaker and Swain and French's work in 2010 as well, around this thing called the affirmation model. And I'm just briefly going to talk about it before we really move into how we're going to apply it. Right? An affirmation model of disability would include disability culture, which is not mentioned in the social model, community, personal identity and identities, right? We have multiple identities. I'm a gay, disabled, Irish American, right? Third generation from immigration, first generation college student in my family, right? We have lots of identities that come to play in our work. The affirmation model includes culture, community, and identity as shaped by disability. The message here, right, so it builds on and brings forward all the good stuff from the social model, but focuses on the barriers that exist that we need removed in order to have the full experience of our civil rights, and I would argue have our full human rights. It's not about wanting to be like non-disabled people. Oh no, right? We're fine as we are. Our disabilities are an important part of ourselves and our lives. So we need those both recognized and embraced and considered in a redesign of what we're doing in education. So we focus here on conserving disability, protecting disability, not trying to erase disability. We're not looking for the cure. We want to celebrate that the inherent worth an individual brings in life, regardless of what their disability labels may be. And changing the environments, changing social activities for that fit to happen, and to affirm people in the process. So what does disability affirming education do or look like? The broad picture of it, and we're going to kind of unpack these and then move into specific categories of work that we can do in schools. Broad indicators of disability affirming education would recognize individual and group disability identity. It would honor disability community, culture, and the intersectionality within. It would ensure representation in people, in materials, right? We'd want to see representation in employment, in personnel in our schools, as well as in the materials that are used in schools. It would address the impact of marginalization, the historical impact, repeated impacts of trauma on individuals with disabilities who have experienced really problematic intervention and or general treatment in their life. And how does that build and affect an individual as they're engaging in education over time? Disability affirming education would include an effort to dismantle what's not working, right? Dismantle the ableist stuff, attitudes, structures, systems, right? We're not talking about just building another happy facade on the front. We have to take apart all the goopy stuff on the backdrop, right? We don't want just a prop of disability affirming. We've got to do the dismantling stuff as well. And it would promote these practices that, again, conserve, and that's a very strategically chosen word, right? When we think about conservation efforts, we want to protect, right? We want to make sure that individuals, beings can thrive, and we want to celebrate those individuals. So you have a document that came with the session materials. On the left-hand column are the descriptors that I just reviewed, and I'm reviewing them very quickly with some assumption about some of the shared knowledge in this room as I look at the list of participants. So if anybody needs me to back up and clarify something, I will. But I'll also remind you that we're about to take a kind of more weedy dive into 4 categories that these group of descriptors impact in schools. And that may also help clarify. So contrast this left column of descriptors with what's happening in the right column. Right? So as we think about recognizing identity, recognizing the individual's worth, a non-example would be promoting deficit-based thinking, stereotypes. misunderstandings around disability, right? I love some of the work that Thai Center has done in partnership with the Washington State Inclusive Practices Project. I love their Mythbusters materials that they've generated, myths and facts. Those are great, and those fall right in line there. Honoring disability community, a contrasting point would be to limit understanding of culture to something that exists only according to race or ethnicity or geography or gender expression, right? That there are cultures and subcultures that that convene and group within the broad umbrella of disability. And we know that there are many subgroups and subcultures with their own sets of agreements about how to be in community. So we want to blow open this idea that culture is just, like when we talk about culturally responsive practice, a lot of people default to race, ethnicity considerations, and there's so much more there, right? We want to ensure representation. So the contrasting non-example, a lack of representation or lack of visibility of disabled educators, positive role models available to youth in schools. Addressing the impact of trauma, right? The non-example of what's happening is providing special ed services only by specialized staff in special spaces, right? When we do things that promote masking or trying to pass as neurotypical, that's fostering trauma. That would be a non-example. Dismantling all this goopy stuff that's happened, right? We've got to, the non-example is this, it's like the stone in the river that just won't wear down, right? This preservation of a status quo of marginalization, of inaccessibility. Well, these are the curriculum materials we've always used. They just aren't accessible. This is always the way we've made these decisions for placement that result in marginalization. Promoting practices, again, that celebrate disability. The non-example, framing disability as a disorder, framing disability as something to be pitied or fixed in the individual. These are non-examples. So the emerging question here, right, starts is like, can I identify the difference, right? Basic learning progression information here. Let's start with similarities and differences, right? So in your words, I want you to kind of think back now, this big picture of what's affirming and what's not. How would you summarize this in your words? What's the difference between disability affirming and non-disability affirming? Reflect for a moment on your own. Try to create your own sentence or summary, like if you were talking to a family member or a friend who didn't really know that much about the field. How would you try to explain this difference to them? You're welcome to share in chat. You're also welcome to keep your summary to yourself. I'll give you about 2 minutes to do so. Amy, really great using a specific example to represent the differences here. Nice. I love that phrase, just as they are. It's a really powerful hanger, right? Like, what if nothing else changes for this individual and they remain just as they are? How are we creating spaces that affirm them? Appreciate the specifics of your example as well, Debbie, right? Like in your day-to-day grind, this is what things look like. That's excellent. Wonderful. Others, feel free to drop your ideas into chat. In your kind of everyday language, how would you summarize this difference, the similarities and differences between the two? Wonderful. Keep them rolling. I'm going to move us into the next section. We are 1/3 the way through our time together this afternoon, and we're right on schedule with the webinar plan. So here we go. Let's dig in now. We're going to move to that third resource that I previewed, the disability-affirming indicators that are broken into 4 groupings: culture, curriculum, supports, and space. We want to acknowledge there could be more categories. We want to acknowledge there could be many more indicators. We were looking for a starting point for this conversation. In particular, we wanted a set of indicators that we could consider to help resolve this dilemma, right? If disabled students are to develop a healthy, positive sense of themselves, then we need to be thinking about multiple arenas of education and the need to shift them, redesign, and foster environments where students feel safe and valued and respected, can express their authentic selves. If you flap, let it out. Recognize and appreciate the diversity of others, right? So if all this good stuff is going to happen, what are some initial things that would get us started in the work? And that's where we landed on our version 1 of these indicators. We updated, we removed an indicator that we had that we felt was nice, but not specifically about disability affirming education. It was more about inclusive education generally. So we removed that indicator and we've added in a couple of indicators in this version 1.1 around IEPs and individualized supports. So we're going to take each of those 4 sections: culture, curriculum, supports, space. I'm going to share with you some examples that we have that we've bumped into. Some of the examples are probably things that you're familiar with or you've seen. And then at the end of each of these 4 sections, you'll be given 2 prompts. One will be to just kind of check for understanding. Like, are you thinking you're getting it, an initial understanding of that part of the work? And then 2, I give you 3 choice prompts for your own reflection. So let's jump into section number 1 and talk about disability-affirming culture in schools. The indicators we have in this arena include the following: understanding and applying equity versus equality, right? School staff would understand the difference and would be applying an equity lens in their work. People would be considering the impact of language. I saw that come up in one of the examples earlier. They would engage with bias, right? Recognize it, name it, and practice anti-bias. You'd employ disabled adults and as leaders, as educators, as staff in the system. You'd enroll and you would engage disabled students in general education. And you'd make sure that the representation was in natural proportions, right? If we have 10% of the local community are people with disabilities, we'd be looking for that representation in the neighborhood school. We'd be looking for that representation in the staffing arrangements in the building. What does that look like? So, some examples. In terms of language, you've already heard me toggling back and forth in my language, using both identity first and person first language. Disability affirmation would include us providing both and allowing individuals to learn and choose about the differences, right? So identity first, I identify as an ADHDer, right? You might say somebody has an autistic child, a disabled person, right? It's leading with the identity. Person first language, the individual has ADHD, a child with autism, a person with disabilities. For me, the language shift became most obvious when I used my gayness in the conversation. So if I say to you, I'm a gay male, people hear that. They don't necessarily hear any weirdness about the wording phrasing. Right? But if I say I'm a male with gayness, like it's this little purple bedazzled purse that I carry around with me, that sounds weird, right? We're leading not with the identity core first, right? We think about being gay as part of who, I think about being gay as part of who I am, right? Person first, shift with identity first. How can we use both and provide choices and follow individuals' leads? Ask them what language works for them. Related to language, I've put a link here at the bottom of a great resource if you're wanting to do anything with ableist phrases that are popular in our current society. That link will get you to some great ableist words and terms. In terms of working with the culture in schools, I love this tool by the Thai Center and Eric Carter, creating communities of belonging for students with significant cognitive disabilities. While the title is a bit of a mouthful, the tool itself, right, centered on belonging, provides excellent prompts for school communities to grapple with, talk about, answer, and plan around in order to create a shift in the culture toward belonging for everybody in the system. Love, love, love this tool. This next tool, again, good for kind of broader culture work that we have to think about in school, this idea of being anti-biased in education. So this is a self-reflection tool that I was first introduced to about 5 years ago by Nicole Tucker-Smith in a session she was doing at a CAST Universal Design for Learning Symposium. And it really struck me because it pulls out beyond any one particular area, right? It's not just focused on disability. And yet with each of the indicators, you can imagine yourself using disability as an example. And what this does is it's a self-reflection to say, where am I in my anti-biased education work? Am I not yet engaged? Right? If I read those 4 indicators on the far left of the screen and I resonate mostly with those, then that would be where I'd be kind of thinking about now looking to the right for my next best work. Am I engaged? A set of 6 indicators that I might resonate with to show me I'm kind of in that place of development around being anti-biased in education, or am I actively practicing? And if I was actively practicing anti-biased education, what would that look like? Well, it would look like the stuff in the far right column here, the indicators that talk about I identify and take action in areas where bias benefits some community members and marginalizes others. I speak out when I see bias in curriculum, in treatment, behavior. I advocate for policies and practices. That would mean that we're practicing. So you can use this, you can print out this slide, bring it to all staff meeting in your school, school board meeting for discussion. What does it mean to be anti-biased in education? Love it. All right, so those are just some quick teasers. I'm sorry, I was just trying to read up on the chat to see what had happened while I was going through that section. So in terms of the culture piece, my aim in a 90-minute webinar is to build at least an initial understanding of disability-affirming culture. So I want to check with you with a quick poll. Yes, do you feel like you have an initial understanding of disability-affirming culture? 2, maybe I do. 3, no, I'm not getting it based on those examples in that description. Plop your number into the chat. Are you a 1, yes, a 2, maybe, or a 3, no? Thank you again to everybody for replying in the chat as to everyone instead of just to host and panelists. That little blue drop-down toggle button lets everybody else know what you're thinking as well. So we have a community of sharing that's happening for us. Great, still more great examples dropping in. Thank you all so much. That's awesome. It looks like we've got all 1s across the board here. So I'm going to move ahead to allowing you to do now more specific reflection and possible action with the materials that were just reviewed. And you can choose one of the following, whatever works for you. You might suggest an additional indicator or look for. You might reflect on the barriers that you're encountering and possible solutions to those barriers. You might share a success example where you've seen something positive that leads toward disability-affirming culture. Choose one of the following, A, B, or C. You don't have to, but you're welcome to share in chat if you've got a few keyword descriptors or a couple of sentences that you would like to put out to the group for any of these 3 prompts. And I'm going to put 2 minutes on my timer and give you 2 minutes of just reflection time on disability affirming culture. Okay, that's 2 minutes. I'd love to give you more time, but you'll have time after the webinar's over. We're got some more examples, and one that just came in that I think is just a host and panelists. I'll read it to you all. A barrier that I see is teachers and staff who say it's not their job to create equity and to create a more affirming school culture or to teach disabled students, right? So that's a huge barrier. If teachers and staff don't see that as central to their job, right? A great intervention point then is to look at hiring practices and job descriptions. Right? Some of these solutions may not be the direct response to the individual, but can we shape the environment such that this is now what's expected? I'm seeing lots of other shares to everyone. Thanks for sharing successes as well there as barriers and suggestions. Great list. This is wonderful. Okay. Let's move ahead to disability affirming curriculum. The indicators in this section follow on, for example, using an agreed upon framework for unit and lesson design. So often I go into schools and I see educators who are all maybe individually doing some great things, but they're all doing it in slightly different ways that don't allow them to cross-share the great examples of what they're doing, or to have a common way to think about unit and lesson design or provision of supports. So when educators don't have an agreed upon framework to use and everybody's kind of doing their own gig, yay for autonomy, but boo for resource allocation and boo for community building amongst our educators to share their expertise with one another. We want to ensure in the curriculum that there's accurate, positive, and neutral, at least neutral representations of disability in the materials that we're using. Right? Curriculum includes the goals that we're setting, the assessments that we're designing and using, the methods we use, right? The instructional arrangements, the particular teaching practices, as well as the materials that we're using. And then we think about how all those 4 things come together with the given learning space or learning environment. So do the materials have accurate representation of disability? Are we facilitating conversations that involve disability regularly in our learning communities? Allowing youth to explore individual and group identity and multiple identities. Even in today's political climate, we need to be having this conversation, maybe more so now than ever. Right? Involving disabled adults in the day-to-day work of schools so that there's visibility, presence. Auditing curriculum for bias and ableism, right? Let's take a look at what we're using and any particular baked-in bias that we're having to neutralize if we're going to continue to use that particular curriculum. Providing equitable and accessible assessments and applying college and career readiness standards in the work. And so here are some examples around curriculum considerations. So this photo here in the center of this book rack was taken in a recreation room in a local high school here in New Hampshire. And there on the rack is Being Human by Judith Heumann. And my friend who sent me this photo, actually my friend, it was Mary Shue who sent me this photo, the co-author of this work. And she opened up the book and took another snapshot, and you see it's all highlighted and people written it up and tabbed pages, so it's clearly getting some use. And I would say it's getting more use than that Runner's magazine in the upper left. So, having just everyday representation and materials on a bookshelf is a shift in curriculum for us. We can also specifically act to introduce disability into curriculum. And I love, 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 love the work of the Disability Equality Education Project. I've given the link at the bottom there, disabilityequalityeducation.org. They have developed a set of lesson plans across the age span that are ready with materials for educators to use, and they're all available for free. Their work is so helpful, right? Our educators don't need to reinvent the wheel here. There are some wonderful resources available, and this is one of the resources that I think should be a go-to for our work in the area of rethinking disability representation in curriculum. So one that I pulled out was, I believe, a middle school history in disability history and social studies lesson plan. And the lesson plan highlights the discussion around the history of the ADA, and specifically unpacking in the lesson plan our activities around the Capitol Crawl and its role in the successful urging to Congress to vote on the ADA. Check out their resources. Wonderful, wonderful stuff. This example is related to this interrogation of bias, as well as looking at barriers that are evident in the design, delivery, and utilization of curricula in schools. I worked with a school here in the Northeast. We'll call them Sunny Memorial School, SMS. And they were interested in both MTSS and UDL, and they had a particular set of community agreements, community commitments that were very much foundational values and beliefs that they hold in their community. And they wanted to make sure that their use of MTSS would align with those. They were fearful that MTSS would take them off from their community values and community commitments. So we worked to braid and blend these things together, and educators in the building came up with and designed a set of indicators that they're going to use annually, regularly, routinely in their practice. And so I just pulled out a couple of here that represent this curricular work that we're talking about. They have one that educators will interrogate curriculum for bias in, and then you see the list, in relation to ability, race, wealth, sex, gender identity, sexual identity, citizenship, skin color, formal education, neurodiversity, mental health, body size, religion, right? They're saying we need to be looking for all of these things specifically. And they have a commitment to utilize Universal Design for Learning principle guidelines and checkpoints, which I think are now considerations. This was the prior version of the UDL guidelines that we were using when we built this. Using UDL principles and practices to identify and eliminate barriers in curriculum. And you'll see in blue here the tagline, following the delivery of any unit. So in their grade level educator meetings, when educators finish facilitating a complete unit from a course of studies, they do an evaluation of that unit to look for barriers. Let me reflect on how that unit went. If I were to do this again, what would I change to reduce barriers to the true variety of learners I have? Those are some quick examples around disability-affirming curriculum. Is that making sense for you all? Do you feel like you have an initial understanding of disability-affirming curriculum? Enter 1 in chat if your answer is yes, a 2 if maybe, a 3 if no. Okay, so we're getting mostly 1s and some 2s, some maybes there. I gave you fewer examples on curriculum. So this next activity will allow you to dig in a little bit more and reflect a little bit more on the examples. So pull out the tool, review the indicators that are there. They're a little bit more specific than the bullet points I had on the slides. And during the next 2 minutes, choose one of the following, same prompts. A, suggest an additional indicator or look for. B, reflect on barriers that you may be encountering and solutions to those barriers. Or C, share a success you've seen in disability-affirming curriculum. I'll give you 2 minutes. Go ahead. Loving the examples I'm seeing and your ideas that are popping up in chat. Really wonderful stuff. These are great. Keep them flowing. These are awesome. Next time we do this, you all should teach this section. These are awesome. Do it. Oh, love the successes. Great. Excellent, excellent. Okay. So let's move to the third category out of 4. So we are 3/4 of the way through the tool itself, with about 30 minutes left in the webinar. So we're 2/3 of the way through the webinar. Exciting. Okay, so supports. And in our tool, we refer to this specifically as individualized supports. Right, so we can include in here conversations about specially designed instruction, as well as individualized support. So we want to think in terms of our IEPs, and are we portraying students with strengths-based descriptions? Are we applying a presumption of competence? And I want to be clear, I feel like I always have to clarify this. A presumption of competence does not mean assuming that somebody already knows something, right? It's presuming that an individual can learn through good instruction, can learn grade level content, can learn to communicate through good instruction. So it's linked with this idea of high expectations, but it's specifically presuming that an individual is competent to learn something in how I'm applying it here. Prioritizing goals within an IEP that include fostering understanding of disability and integrating disability identity. How horrifying would it be to meet a middle school student who has autism and doesn't know what autism is? Can you imagine? And yet that's happening around our country, right? I got into my mid-20s before I understood what ADHD really truly was and that I have it, right? That having to work after the fact to integrate that into your identity is not fair to our students, our kids. So we want to make sure that IEPs include goals for students to understand their disabilities and to integrate that into their identity. Understanding the underlying reasons for behavior is more affirming than not, right? When we stop at the function of the behavior, we may be missing the real underlying issue, right? Joey is escaping from math. Well, why is he trying to escape from math, right? What's going on in math that is problematic for him? What's underneath that? Provide and model augmentative and alternative communication. Right? We have lots of present and visible, audible models of speech in schools. For our users of AAC, those with unreliable speech, we need to immerse them in models of what it looks like to be a proficient communicator using AAC. So that may mean in some communities that we're having to really bring in additional resources specifically for that model and teaching people how to model AAC just as part of everyday learning. We see this happening more and more so around sign language in schools. We want to now start lifting up more common use of AAC. I'm seeing some great playground communication boards on display. We can do more in this area. And providing role models and mentors with shared identities to our youth. That is an individualized support, having a mentor. So some examples, some of which those of you on the webinar may have helped create. Again, I'm going to reference some work done by the Thai Center and the Washington Office of Public Instruction. Their online materials, their guides, their book chapters have just been filled with rich examples and rich resources. One of which includes a great compilation of good things to be doing, best practices to be doing with IEP development. So, are we thinking seriously about strength-based descriptions? It's not just, Jane likes these kinds of things. Now let me move to the deficit list, right? It's rebuilding all of the descriptions. Elder also has some great resources on this that really unpack use of strength-based descriptors throughout the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. So thinking about strength-based language in our documentation, in our day-to-day work. Individualized supports that lift up disability identity development, right? So I'm talking about the developmental side. How do individuals come to understand their disability and integrate that in as part of their identity, right? Disability identity, as I'm talking about it here, I've given you the citation for it, a unique aspect of identity that includes a person's sense of self as a person with a disability, as well as their connection to a disability community. I participate as I approach 60 in my life. I participate every month in an ADHD support group. And that community of individuals, not all of them are my friends just because they have ADHD, but some of them have become my friends. There's definitely a community and a group identity that we have with our individual identities, right? We have common shared experiences as a result of that disability in this particular ableist society that we can support each other around and bond around, that gives us greater resilience. This all emerges from disability identity work. So we want to support youth with indicators, possibly in their IEPs, from the right-hand column of what you see on your screen, right? Supporting our students to explore disability history and culture, identify and describe the characteristics of the disability model, their disability models and mentors, like who is a model to you in the disability community? What are the characteristics of a role model in disability and in other arenas, but then translating that back and applying it in the area of disability. Supporting students to understand their self-worth, understand and appreciate individual unique qualities and experiences that they have, develop critical thinking about external messages that come in from the media, from your local community. Goldie Muhammad talks about this idea of critical thinking in a particular way where she uses the term criticality. If you're not familiar with Goldie Muhammad's work, highly recommend it, particularly around this concept of criticality, which she's talking about through a race and ethnicity lens. And it all applies here in terms of disability. How are we developing and supporting our youth to engage in critical thinking and have a critical lens of what's happening around them so that they're not just buying into and potentially absorbing and developing internalized ableism, right? Recognizing, oops, that was fun. Recognizing and disrupting bias, like how can we support our youth to develop the skills to do that well? And to support our youth to sustain effort through and to learn from mistakes and missteps and trouble spots, right? When you encounter a barrier, how do you persist through, over, around, under that barrier? How do you remove that barrier? What does that effort look like? We need to be our own self-advocates, as well as be supported by other advocates. In terms of individualized supports on that notion of behavior supports going beyond the function, right? I gave you the example earlier, like Joey's trying to escape from math, right? So the function might be to avoid this activity of math, but why is the underlying question we have to get to? And we keep asking that. Why, until we get to the root of what's happening for Joey. Are there sensory inputs that an individual is trying to get or to avoid, and why? What's happening for them? Those result in more respectful and affirming supports for individuals. Okay, this next one, I want you to think with me. This is the first time I've dropped this information into a particular conversation in one of my webinars. So thanks for being my guinea pigs. I want to talk with you briefly about this idea of, it's called quaternary MTSS. Don't freak out on the multisyllabic words just yet. But a lot of us are familiar with tiered instructional supports, right? Tier 1, Tier 2, add a little bit more, Tier 3, individualized support. Quaternary MTSS might suggest to you a fourth tier, but what it is a preventative lens of looking at all that is happening for individuals who are highly likely to receive a lot of intervention to make sure we're not over-treating the individual or delivering harmful interventions. So this work is clearly based in a medical field where when individuals like my mom and dad are on multiple medications, we're looking for interactions. We're looking for, is this the right part of this medication for this individual? And what's that dosage look like? Now, it's not that blocked in terms of education, but we need to be looking for and minimizing the risk of harmful practices when we're having a tiered instructional model that specifically requests that you identify interventions for kids, that those aren't harmful or that we're not excessive, and ensuring that the focus stays on a student's holistic needs, that whole being that is in front of you, that whole child, and not breaking them off into the reading arm and the math leg and the social studies shoulder, right? And developing interventions for these individual parts without consideration for the whole. So, for example, monitoring for interventions that promote masking or passing would be a specific activity in this idea of quaternary MTSS, where the intervention may violate basic biology and neurology and what we know about that particular disability. Right? We see autistics still having goals around eye contact, right, which just shows a lack of knowledge of the biological underpinnings and neurological underpinnings, right? Social skills that have a normative set of expectations, toilet training that overlooks interoception, right? Interoception, how our internal senses let us know when we have to go to the bathroom. Well, if you're going to do toilet training that doesn't investigate interoception to see, well, can the kid even sense when they have to go to the bathroom, right? Setting up some other kind of training program that ignores that, it's not going to be effective. So we have lots of things that we can consider here that may be potentially harmful or that are excessive in their intervention nature. I'm working this up some more, and I love that somebody wrote this is incredible. Well, thank you. That's awesome. I'm working up some guides that would be more kind of discussion guides for folks who are working in a context of MTSS to really have a protocol when kids are getting tier 3 interventions, multiple tier 3 interventions, particularly the kiddos that we're concerned about here in TASH, those with the most extensive or complex support needs, that we have a way to investigate, interrogate, question, are we over-treating? Are we providing harmful interventions? And how would we recognize that? So I'm working those things up if anybody wants to help me with that. Okay, so supports. I may have gone a little over on that one. Get excited about supports. So are you getting an initial understanding of what disability-affirming individualized supports may look like and may include? 1, yes, 2, maybe, 3, no. Please put your number in chat. Oh, Mary Fisher dropping the ABA bomb. Love it. Good conversation to be in, right? Like, I think that protocol would be really helpful to the field of ABA to consider. We know that it's not necessarily because of key leaders in our field. We know some people who use ABA in what I might feel are really affirming ways. I use ABA principles to guide how I approach behavioral assessments with individuals. But we've got lots of people here in the Northeast, at least, who've kind of gone through a Dunkin' Donuts drive-through of ABA certification, and it's not okay. Ooh, Paula Kluth is in the house. Thank you, Paula. So supports for reflection for yourselves. Choose one of the following. I'll give you 2 minutes. Again, you can suggest an additional indicator or look for in the area of individualized supports that are disability affirming. Reflect on some of the barriers you're bumping into. Share a success story. 2 minutes, go for it. Share in chat as you are comfortable. Chelsea, great example, right? Welcome to our autism program, where only autistics come. That is not affirming, right? All autistics will get the following curriculum with the following interventions. That denies individual identity and individual characteristics. Okay. 2 minutes goes so quick when I'm sitting with you all. All right, last bucket of the four for the tool is to consider space, right? Our learning environments and our social environments in schools, which are also learning spaces, right? We want to check and ensure accessibility. Let's drop that bar really low, right? Like, is there basic accessibility happening in this space? Are we incorporating sensory and motor friendly spaces throughout our school? Do we post these accurate and positive representations of disability in these spaces, right? Do we have those representations in all spaces? Are we structuring special education as a service and not a space, right? And promoting and supporting participation in extracurricular activities. So I'm seeing more great examples get dropped in the chat. I still want to go back and do more with those, but let's keep moving. So here are some examples of thinking about disability affirming space and how that might inform what we're doing in inclusive education and kind of bump us up a bit. So on this idea of incorporating sensory and motor friendly space, we worked with a school that transformed a formerly segregated space just for the disabled into regulation centers that were made available to everybody in the building. And the two spaces we created there, we called them the spa and the gym. And this was done in a partnership with Autism Level Up. If you're not familiar with Autism Level Up, highly love their work, highly recommend their work. Amy Laurent and Jacqueline Feedy, Dr. Amy and Dr. Jack, they're super duper autistic thinkers and practitioners in the world. So we turned one of the spaces into a gym, right? So there's a trampoline, a move and sit cushion, stationary bike, balls for stretching. We also added in some weight sets with guides around and kind of taught people how to use the space. The school started setting up routines for how any individual could request the use of the space. And then we had a kind of low energy, low input space. No overhead lighting, all indirect lighting. We set up an art station. We set up a blackout tent. You see in the middle photo there, that kind of silver framed was a blackout tent. You go inside, you Velcro zip yourself into the space, and it's the darkest space I've ever been in my life. I loved it. It was awesome. We set up kind of a comfy, cozy corner with fun textured blankets and beanbag chairs, and there were music options, and we set up a scent bar as well, a whole arrangement of little sniff bottles that you could choose one to kind of neutralize and or lift up your olfactory system. Quite the little buzz there. So that's a different utilization of space that moves toward a more disability affirming notion. A town here in Concord, New Hampshire, they convened a community group who did fundraising and engaged designers for a fully accessible playground for the entire community. Took them years to get everything in place, right? So this full park, White's Park, has a completely accessible in all different ways and shapes playground. Available now to all families, and it's just built that way. So those are some examples of some of the things we can be doing with space. And I have another one that Mary didn't want me to kind of go there just yet, because we're both questioning how this would work. But in terms of space, think of the example of educators who have the safe zones stickers in their windows, right? Specifically sending a message to LGBTQ plus populations that educator, that classroom is a safe space. That educator would willingly disrupt homophobic, anti-gay, anti-queer language in that space, right? Would conserve the LGBTQ plus community in that space. That educator is a safe space for the individual, right? That's the safe zones triangle stickers were all about, and they were a product that you could get when you completed a particular training, or you could individually just hang a sticker. I'm interested in exploring the idea of that kind of thing happening in the disability arena. What would it mean to be a disability-affirming educator who can identify their space in a way that communicates to others with disabilities? I'm a safe space for you. So I had a disability pride colors into a thumbprint logo. We can talk about going there. So other ways to create disability-affirming space. So what's your understanding of this space idea? Do you have an initial understanding of this? 1, yes, 2, maybe, 3, no. Susan, I'm glad you think that would be amazing. Thank you for reinforcing my idea. I know, I'd love to make it happen. Okay. Oh, nice, Rayanne. You have 3 love stickers on your van. Ooh, that could work. Yes, Joiner. I like that. Right? Teaching students, what does accessible space look like for you and for others? Can you identify it? Love that. Yeah, these are so common, right, Ruth? Absolutely, right? We've still got this odd tethering of service and space. We need to disrupt that, disentangle it, cut the cord between the special supports and the special spaces. How many S's are in that phrase? Awesome. These are great. Oh, yes, Paula. Absolutely. Right? We want to think about this in broader architectural budgets and efforts. Right? When schools are talking about building a new school or wing, we want to be at that table. So design is considered up front. All right. So we have covered the 4 categories of indicators that come with version 1.1 of the tool. You all have provided some rich examples of barriers, of potentially extra indicators to add into the tool, and some nice success stories. Thank you so much for putting those into the chat. It can be challenging to do it that way. I'm not sure if we've had many questions or any questions submitted, but in the last 6 minutes that we have, I'm not going to do, I coded them, you'll see here in the upper left of this slide. If time, we can review and enhance real examples together. So the next, I think I've got like 4 or 5 examples here. The next 4 slides are examples that I've bumped into in my day-to-day work that are not disability affirming. And so you can use these as conversation starters to kind of read the brief scenario and think about ways to enhance that. Go back to the indicator. So you can feel free to use these with folks if you kind of want to do a little in-service with these materials. Just take it and run with it. Have at it. It's all good. Just please cite the source. That would be appreciated. But we put these out there for free for you all. So if you have others who want access to these materials, they can go to the Evolve and Effect website, which is the links are at the end of the document and at the end of the slides. So you can get people to our resource page, and we have actually lots of resources that we put out there for free, just like so many other great leaders in our field who are willing to share their goods. And keep in mind, this is a living document for us. We did the update for this webinar, so follow us on Facebook if you want to know when we make further changes to the tool or provide some supplementary guides to go with it. We usually post pretty regularly if we update a new tool there, or check back with us in some other way. I will, if there are any questions or just a comment that somebody wants to unpack more, please drop it into chat. While you all are writing your last question or comment, I want to go back and kind of note, several people picked up on the sticker idea, and I see only positives around it. And I always, with any technology that we introduce, there can be misuse and harm. Right? I would hate for a disability pride sticker in a window to send a message to a child that this educator is safe when the educator feels like they're safe, but they're actually not. Right? And we had that same thing happen with the Safe Zones project, and trying to build affirming spaces for queer youth. Educators who would come through training programs who would go back with their safe zone sticker and put it in their window when they weren't really there yet. They still had their own more work to do to unpack their own stuff. So just a thought. So let me see if there are questions and comments. Debbie, good to hear you agree with that. I struggle with it back and forth. I feel like it would open up really great conversations for educators, and there could be some risk to our students. Oh, wonderful! Thank you, Joanna. That's awesome. Keep sharing our stuff. Spread the good word. Regarding the MTSS and UDL practice profile, Louis Lord Nelson, the co-author on that work, she and I are working on a book. We're trying to get it done, but it's not done yet. We wanted it to be out last year, but we had to find a new publisher. But we have a whole book that will be coming out around MTSS and UDL and truly blending them. Wonderful, Paula. Take those application ideas, those application scenarios, and run with them. I'm sure you'll come up with even better ones. So please take them and just kind of innovate on them. And share what you innovate with. Love to get things back. Ruth asked, love to hear your suggestions on how I could utilize these tools at the district and school sites I work at. So Ruth, there's a number of different ways you can do it to introduce the conversation, right? You can introduce it, of course, in a formal professional learning event. You can introduce it at a staff meeting. If your school has for example, an MTSS implementation team, or your district has an MTSS implementation team, you could bring the indicators to that implementation team to say, could we reflect on these in terms of how we're talking about and using MTSS? That could be a starter conversation. Some people like a really tangible entry point, right? So what do these mean for this thing that we do in our building? You could introduce them through individual conversations. And I tend to encourage people to target those who are likely to be early adopters first, right? Bring the tool to people you think will likely get it or are already there, who can then share it more with people in their social and communication and work networks, to spread it that way. We don't want to sit down the person who is least likely to get it to kind of force disability affirmation down their throat. That's probably not going to work. We want to build a wave of momentum around this. So Ruth, those are just a few quick ideas. And this webinar will be recorded. So that would be another way to introduce it. If you have a team that wants to watch me for 90 minutes, that'd be great. Extremely compelling and important. So excited to hear the book. Yes, we're trying to get it out there, China. We're trying. Um, okay, I think we are at 3:30. So, as you leave here, please, be thinking about what your next steps are, not only to include students, but also affirm disabled students. And what does that look like? Is there a difference between how we've been talking about inclusive education and this idea of disability affirming education? For me, the aha of the differences may lie in this quote from Lydia Brown. Thank them for all of their leadership in our field. We are long past the diversity and inclusion point. We do not want or need to be included into oppressive systems. Programs without critical analysis only uphold existing systems. It's irresponsible and dangerous to proceed as if assisting disabled people can take place in a vacuum. Everything that therapists, teachers, and other professionals do takes place in a context. Is that context disability affirming or not? Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day. Hope to bump into all of you at the TASH conference, the 50th year celebration TASH conference this December in Denver, Colorado. Take care until then.
Thank you so much, Michael. That was a lot of information, great information. So thank you so much. You will be receiving the recording within a week. Let's give us some time to do some editing. May 15th is our next webinar, Comprehensive Inclusive Education, Writing and Implementing Inclusive IEPs with Gare Greer and Jamie Kidder and Jen Somersonis. So without, I hope everyone enjoyed themselves and we hope to see you next week. Thank you.
Thank you all.